Greetings everyone. This segment is the footnotes to a video dealing with vaccines, autism and the CDC Institute that my colleague Kel posted on his YouTube channel years ago that was taken down by the YouTube admin because they say it violated the community guidelines. You'll soon discover for yourself that no violation occurred.
Wait a minute now.
But before showing the video, allow me to share the latest 2023 update from the CDC, given by the Today news station morning show.
Data from the CDC that shows more children than ever are being diagnosed with autism. Joining us with details and the takeaways for parents who are watching and listening this morning, NBC's senior medical correspondent, Dr. John Torres. Dr. Torres, I found this eye-opening. 20 years ago, 1 in 150 kids had autism in this country. The CDC now says that number is 1 in 36 children. Do we know what's driving the increase?
It looks like the majority of increase is because of increased awareness and screening. And that's
Hold on. Did you just say the increase in autism rate is due to an increase in awareness and screening?
It looks like the majority of increase is because of increased awareness and screening.
How can the increased awareness of the people be a factor in the climbing rate of autism? This guy is clearly smoke screening you. For him to be a doctor and gives you an answer to why their rise in autism rate shows you plainly that these clowns are puppets used to sound professional but are feeding you misinformation and disinformation. People, please be mindful and consider this as fact.
Because of increased awareness and screening, and that's happening right now. As a matter of fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics didn't recommend routine screening for autism until 2008. And now what they recommend is screening for autism at 18 and 24 months and developmental screening for all the other developmental milestones at 9, 18, and 30 months. And so more screening's happening, it's happening in more places, and so we're getting more diagnoses.
Say what? The heck buddy here talking about? Make it make sense.
More screening's happening, it's happening in more places, and so we're getting more diagnoses.
Please tell me he's kidding. He's not really convinced we fell for his misdemeanor assessment attempt, do he?
John Torres, I won't even call you doc. I must say to you, how dare you get on TV and lie to the people like you don't know what's the cause. You do know.
It's affecting different demographics for the first time. CDC finding more than 1% of girls overall have autism. Predominantly it's been found in boys. And certain minority groups reporting more cases of the disorder than ever before.
Wait a minute now.
And certain minority groups reporting more cases of the disorder than ever before. So is
this again more screening and that's why we're catching it, or is there suddenly more prevalence in some of these groups?
So what we think is happening is we don't really have a firm understanding of causes.
Wait. What the heck did he just said?
Because we don't really have a firm understanding of causes, but we do understand risks more.
Risk? Y'all showed us a doctor.
But the overall driving factor for the numbers you're seeing going up is that screening and awareness, the equity behind it.
Hold on. Did he just say the...
Yeah, he did. Equity? This isn't real estate classes, John. Come on, man. You have a plethora of articles on heralding your alleged mastery, and the best you can do is get your donkey on the show sounding like a barber in a barber shop somewhere. No pun to barbers any. As though you're without script responding to the question of a regular customer? Pathetic. Outta here, dude.
And it's happening in more minority communities, so we're getting more minorities screened and more minorities getting diagnosed. And girls on top of that, girls tended to be a little bit left behind because they paid more attention to boys and their hyperactivity than they did girls and some of their behavioral issues, and so girls are now getting screened as well. That equity is important. So overall, it's basically any gender, any race, it could happen to anyone.
I'm offended by how this ignoramus doctor of deception is feeding us misinformation. And shouldn't you be also? Observe his nonsense reasons why the rate of autism is at its highest, which he claims is because more people are becoming aware and getting screened. Something which I find highly implausible after the American people realized their medical institutes and governments lied about how important it was for everyone to get the jab, noticing the jab didn't give immunity to COVID at all, and strikingly those who didn't get jabbed are better off than those who did. Ladies and gentlemen, if you can't tell bull SHH from truth, you're in trouble. Unbelievable. Now without further waiting, let's take a look now at Kel's video that was taken down. In his video is a precise answer to why there's a rise in autism and what is causing it and who is really behind it. Spoiler alert, don't be shocked if the CDC is involved. But let's see what Kel posted.
Let's proceed with this segment.
Let's talk tonight about thimerosal. There are a lot of people, a lot of Americans very concerned about the impact of this drug, which is found in vaccines, and how it causes autism. Talk about that.
Thimerosal is a preservative that was put in vaccines back in the 1930s. Almost immediately after it was put in, autism cases began to appear. Autism had never been known before. It was unknown to science. And the vaccines were increased in 1989 by the CDC and by a couple of other government agencies.
Something happened in 1989.
Exactly. What happened was the vaccine schedule was increased. We went up from receiving about 10 vaccines in our generation to these kids received 24 vaccines. And they all had this thimerosal in them, this mercury. And nobody bothered to do an analysis of what the cumulative impact of all that mercury was doing to kids. As it turns out, we are injecting our children with 400 times the amount of mercury that FDA or EPA considers safe.
Did he just say?
With 400 times the amount of mercury that FDA or EPA considers safe.
A child on his first day that he's born is injected with a hepatitis B shot. Under EPA guidelines, he would have to be 275 pounds to safely absorb that shot.
I see a system restricting the development and evolvement of an ancient nation of souls, grouped to be the resistance and to go to another level and dimension and vibration.
In 1988, 1 in every 2,500 American children had autism. Today, 1 in every 166 children have autism, and plus 1 in 6 children have other kinds of learning disorders, other kinds of neurological disorders, speech delay, language disorders, ADD, hyperactivity, that all seem to be connected, that are all connected, the science shows are all connected to autism.
You know, why are they sitting back and letting our children be poisoned? Why are they sitting back and letting our children be poisoned?
Because the same regulatory bureaucrats that green-lighted thimerosal originally are now trying to cover their tracks.
It's a CYA operation.
Right, and they're working with the pharmaceutical industry, and we now have the transcripts of this secret meeting that they did in Simpsonwood, Georgia in the year 2000.
Listen very close to what Kennedy is about to say. He exposed the puppeteers who know what vaccines are doing to humanity as a whole, but specifically the copper-toned Americans, the indigenous brown tribes they've erroneously given the name African American to. Although they're not African. The American native didn't die off from gifted smallpox blankets, but are being silently wiped off by a constant paper genocide, medical institutes genocide, Planned Parenting, wrongful shootings by cops, and the prison industrial complex. The target is humanity itself, but primarily it's the copper-colored tribes who they engineered to be unconscious of their true identity. Because if they wake up to how they aren't from Africa, and this is their land, and that they are the Indians, that's a game changer. All the fake imposter Indians who are receiving funds that doesn't belong to them will be overthrown, and the power paradigm erected during colonization. We practically owe everything to those indigenous people who the paper government has encouraged all other races to mistreat and scorn and consider less human than other races. Fact is, all races is less human than the Aborigines, who they misnomer as African Americans. This is uncensored facts. Kennedy is about to blatantly tell you that your government and medical institutes are aware of the damage vaccines are causing.
And it's the most horrifying thing that you can read, Joe. There are scientists there from the government who are reading the reports and saying, this is undeniable. There's no way we can ever deny this. I'm not going to give this to my children. But now let's hide this from the American people. And it's the most horrifying thing that you can read, Joe. There are scientists there from the government who are reading the reports and saying, this is undeniable. There's no way we can ever deny this. I'm not going to give this to my children. But now let's hide this from the American people.
Now,
With all these facts prevalent on the subject, I want you to ask yourself, why is the CDC still mandating vaccines to the American public? I mean, it's asinine almost, and it's befuddling, because I can't understand why are they denying it and still trying to vaccinate American people.
Kids these days are getting multiple times more than, when I was a child.
I absolutely concur. We need a second opinion other than Dr. John Torres.
Everybody, I think at this point, we need a second doctor's thoughts on why the rate of autism is escalating. We cannot trust Dr. John Torres' uneducated answer. He clearly admits he and his colleagues are clueless, which I find very suspect. Dr. Torres is spokesman for an elite group, and if you actually believe Dr. Torres and his cohorts don't know why the rate is rising, then you, my sheeple, are part of the problem.
Is this making us healthier, more protected, or what is it actually doing with
No,
these
I mean,
large
I
doses?
really think we've way overdone it on the vaccines. It's funny how we've managed to program people to believe so thoroughly that vaccines are awesome. And the same thing is true for the aluminum in the vaccines as well. And people have talked a lot about the mercury, and the mercury certainly is an issue, and it's very toxic. I looked at the aluminum because that's the one that's gone up quite a bit. We have a lot of aluminum-containing vaccines now that we didn't have before. So that one fits with the what's going up in step with the autism increase. Lots more aluminum-containing vaccines. I mean, for example, even the HPV, which has just been introduced, Gardasil, they're giving that to these kids, teenagers. That's loaded with aluminum. And that's a very nasty vaccine. I've looked at that one too, and it has much, much more severe reactions to that one than to other vaccines that these kids are getting. So it's a very toxic vaccine. And totally unnecessary, in my opinion. And they can't even prove that it's actually doing what it's claiming to do, because it's like 60 years later when you're going to get this cervical cancer that it's supposedly protecting you from, They can't even prove that it's actually doing what it's claiming to do, because it's like 60 years later when you're going to get this cervical cancer that it's supposedly protecting you from. I don't know why anybody would think it was a good idea to get that vaccine.
I beg your pardon. Repeat that again.
I don't know why anybody would think it was a good idea to get that vaccine. The problem is there's synergy between the vaccine and the glyphosate. And I've looked at aluminum and glyphosate. Very, very interesting, because there's papers that show the glyphosate chelates aluminum just like it does all these other minerals. It ends up hiding the aluminum inside the glyphosate molecules, which gets rid of the +3 charge. Aluminum has a very strong positive charge, which ordinarily would keep it in the gut, so it wouldn't get past the gut barrier. But with the cage around it, it becomes a neutral molecule, so that the glyphosate is letting the aluminum pass the gates, from the gut into the blood, from the blood into the brain. And the glyphosate is also bringing the aluminum to the pineal gland, which is outside of the blood-brain barrier. So that pineal gland is much more susceptible. People have studied the amount of aluminum in various parts of the brain. They find the pineal gland has twice as much as the other parts because of it being outside of the blood-brain barrier. So, but with the glyphosate, you get an increased delivery of the aluminum to the pineal gland, which ends up messing it up. And so I've noted that there's sleep disorder associated with so many of these neurological diseases. I mean, autism, Alzheimer's, dementia, depression, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, all of these things are associated with sleep disorder. Pineal gland produces the melatonin that controls the wake-sleep cycle. So when the pineal gland gets messed up, you can't make enough melatonin, you can't sleep, and that's connected then to everything else.
There's a lot of information about things that are happening with the CDC, the pharmaceutical companies. There's a lot of things that are not said. I, as a parent of a child who has autism, I'm concerned, and I want to know the truth, and I'm not anti-vaccine. I want safe vaccines.
So you said you went public for the first time saying that your 18-year-old son does have autism.
Yes.
That had been a very private thing for you. And
Yes.
part of the reason you wanted this film shown was to start that conversation.
Absolutely.
Do you believe you'll now have a role in that conversation going forward?
Possibly, yes. Because the thing is that to shut it down, there's no reason to. If you're scientists, let's see, let's hear. Everybody doesn't seem to want to hear much about it. It's shut down. And you guys are the ones that should be the investigating. Do the investigating. I'm not anti-vaccine, as I say, but I'm pro-safe vaccine. And there are some people who cannot take a vaccine, and they have to be found out and warned that you just don't give a kid a bunch of shots and then something happens.
The worry is that people who hear those words and wonder about it will then not have their child vaccinated, which has led to a higher incidence of things like mumps and measles.
I don't know if those statistics are accurate. I'm not the one to say, but I would question even that. There's a kind of a hysteria, a knee-jerk reaction. Let's see. As I say, everyone should have the choice to take vaccines. Some places it's becoming mandatory, but it does benefit the big drug companies.
Bingo!
Funnily enough.
By November the 9th, 2001, nearly 13 years ago, senior CDC scientists knew that younger age of exposure to MMR was associated with an increased risk of autism. In 2004, they published, but they hid the results.
That's the lowest point in my career that I went along with that paper. And I went along with this. We didn't report significant findings.
MMR was declared safe.
The IOM has evaluated this issue back in 2004 and again most recently in 2011. And their conclusion, again, was not just looking at the work that was done at CDC, but with the total body of evidence, was suggesting that vaccines and their components did not increase the risk for autism.
What Dr. Colleen Boyle, a co-author of that blighted paper, did not tell Congress is that she and her colleagues had deliberately concealed the autism vaccine link from the Institute of Medicine and the public. Ironically, they even received an award from the Secretary of Health and Human Services for this work. So troubling was the fraud that one of the CDC researchers broke ranks. Eventually, he made contact with Dr. Brian Hooker, father of a vaccine-injured child with autism and a vaccine safety researcher.
I received a phone call out of the blue. It had a 404 area code, so I knew it was from the CDC. Lo and behold, it was. He had much to confess.
I'm completely ashamed of what I did. I have great shame now. I was complicit, and I went along with this.
Had appointed me his priest. And when he appointed me his priest, then he started confessing. And we have had many, many phone exchanges. We've exchanged dozens of emails, and he has released quite compelling information regarding fraud and malfeasance in the CDC.
We didn't report significant findings.
Sent Hooker information that was never intended for public scrutiny. From their own data sheets dated 2001, Dr. Hooker analysed the CDC's results, and he found the same risk for autism that the CDC scientists had themselves identified.
It's all there. It's all there.
He confronted.
He has expressed significant remorse for lying, for burying data.
I have great shame now when I meet families with kids with autism, because I have been part of the problem.
This week, August the 10th, 2014, Dr. Hooker published the real findings. A 340% increased risk of autism in boys receiving the MMR on time compared with those receiving it later. 13 years and tens of thousands of children later. But as I've said, Dr. Montgomery and I were only partly right. The risk of autism from early MMR vaccination was seen in black children, black boys. Those boys, for some reason, are at very high risk. Consistent with the CDC's own findings, the rate of autistic regression in black children is reported to be twice that in white children.
Say what? Make it make sense.
Oh my God, I cannot believe we did what we did.
He exposed the puppeteers who know what vaccines are doing to humanity as a whole, but specifically the copper-toned Americans, the indigenous brown tribes they've erroneously given the name African American to. Although they're not African. The American native didn't die off from gifted smallpox blankets, but are being silently wiped off by a constant paper genocide, medical institutes genocide, Planned Parenting, wrongful shootings by cops, and the prison industrial complex. The target is humanity itself, but primarily it's the coppered-colored tribes who they engineered to be unconscious of their true identity. Because if they wake up to how they aren't from Africa, and this is their land, and they don't have Indian in their blood, but that they are the Indians, that's a game changer. All the fake imposter Indians who are receiving funds that doesn't belong to them will be overthrown, and the power paradigm erected during colonization. We practically owe everything to those indigenous people who the paper government has encouraged all other races to mistreat and scorn and consider less human than other races. Fact is, all races is less human than the Aborigines, who they misnomer as African Americans. This is Uncensored Facts.
This is Tom Search, reporting live. Have a great evening. And CDC, fuck you.